Well, Joseph, we're kind of getting down here again to last half hour, and we, I know that again we don't want to exhaust your time, but I'd love to hear just maybe some final thoughts on where you see small group ministry going in the future. So let's kind of bring it back to this to small group ministry. Where do you see it headed, and what are some things that we need to be thinking about as leaders, especially thought leaders? These are grad students. I like to think of my grad students as thought leaders in this in these endeavors. So what's your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think one of the keys to understand about our time and maybe in the short future is that small group uh, must that's a will be more successful when we figure out how to decentralize. And what I mean by that is, remember when I was saying that I could help you get 100% of your people in small groups within a short amount of, a particular time, not for all time, but what we don't realize is that the way we set up small groups in most of our congregation ask people not to come. Mm-hmm. Because it's so centralized. So, to be a leader, you have to attend these 5 leadership groups. You have to be vetted by X, Y, or Z committee to have a small group in your home. Whatever those rules and regulations are, let's just talk about those for a second. As soon as you decide that it doesn't matter who, quote unquote, leads a small group, you've just opened up the gates. Meaning, if you make everyone a small group leader in your congregation and say to them, I have a phrase, grab, gather, and grow. What we want you to do is, because what people are usually most anxious about is what's going to be taught in these homes. And okay, well, you supply the teaching. So give them an online or DVD and say, hey, grab this material, gather a few of your friends, and grow together. That's all I want you to do. That's the only rules. Grab this material, gather a few of your friends. Who would you invite over to a Super Bowl party? I'm not going to gather people for you. I'm not going to put you into a small group because you're a group leader. As soon as you start decentralizing, the more quote unquote success you're going to have. By centralizing the control, you've just limited your reach and your success. So I was a small group pastor about 6 years ago now. I went to a congregation who on Sundays, on weekends, have about 2,600 attendants, okay? They had about 700 when I went there who were a part of their small group system and every week gathered in groups. So about 70 groups. We did grab, gather, and grow for 18 months, meaning in 6-week periods with some periods in between. We supplied material, and all we said is, we did no leadership training. We did no, I'm going to put you in groups. We did none of that. We just gave them a DVD and a book and said, here, grab, gather, and grow. We went from 700 to 4,300 people a week in groups. I had 9-year-old kids who came up and said, can I grab, gather, and grow? I'm like, of course you can. Here's a book. And they put it in the DVD. They gather their 9-year-old friends and they do a group, like a play group together, and they'd all watch it. As soon as you decentralize, and I think that this is one of the best, so coming back to this time, COVID, we have just experienced decentralization. Mm-hmm. We've just leveled the playing field between small church and big church. It's all decentralized, right? And I think that this is great news for the small group ministry to learn a new way to decentralize what they're doing instead of trying to control everything that they're doing and get more people in our neighborhoods. You know, we came up with a phrase, it was in Georgia that I did this last example. It was funny because someone said, well, what if some sketchy people come to groups? Like, well, you know, if you have sketchy friends, invite sketchy friends. I mean, it may be the only gospel they hear. What are you thinking? Of course we want sketchy. So Mr. and Mrs. Sketchy become a group leader because they invite their sketchy friends and they all hear the gospel together. What's the problem? It makes no sense to me. And I think that this boom that we're seeing, as long as we're comfortable, as long as we become comfortable with decentralization, is going to really help us reach more and more people with the gospel.
Starfish and the spider, right, Joe?
That's right, exactly.
Difference between the starfish and the spider. If you've not read that book, that was another influential book of mine in my doctoral work, was that whole idea of decentralization. And actually, I believe, Joseph, that this is the way God actually intended his people to operate. Every time the church centralized, even in the Old Testament, when they centralized around a king, after that point, they went downhill as a nation.
True.
Same thing happened in the church. When we centralized in 323 AD under Constantine, that we've been a centralized culture ever since. And I don't think that's what God designed. I don't think that's what Jesus modeled. You know,
totally agree.
Yeah, the early
even the Tower of Babel hung.
Yeah. So.
Totally agree. And you know, the more that we can put in the hands good content, and I mean that's our responsibility, is putting in every one of our congregation good content so that they aren't just left on their own. But then we back off and say, go to it. You know, I'm working with a small church right now, and they wondered, what's one real creative thing that we can do during this time? Because all of a sudden they're a 50 attending church a week. They have 50 who attend. They have 500 who watch now on Sundays, their sermon. You go, that's a 10x. I mean, what business doesn't want to grow 10x? And they're like, wow, we had no idea. What should we do now? And I said, decentralize your teaching. So now the pastor puts out his preaching notes in a very small 5-minute form and says, anybody, I'd love for you to just get on Facebook during the week and read this. Just read it. You know, put in a personal story if you want. You don't have to, but here's basically my sermon. You know, Jesus said this, and he said do this, and he said do this. Be at peace, go do that. And their congregation, there's like 10 of them doing it. They went from 500 a week in 1 week's time to 1,500 are watching. It's because they decentralized the message. They gave it to their people. All those people just fumbled through it on Facebook. I mean, some of those recordings are just bad. They just look bad, but it's their friends. Their friends know they're bad. They don't have to convince anyone they're good. So they're just getting on there and reading this. They go, hey, my pastor wants me to read this online. Here we go. You know, and they fumble through it. All of a sudden, more and more people are coming to watch that church because they just decentralize the message and off it goes. So I just want to encourage everybody. This is where, you know, people are connecting and belonging in unusual ways and learning new ways. And the more we, quote unquote, try to control it, the more we're going to be in trouble. Mm-hmm. That's all I have.
That's good.
I've just told you more than I know.
Yeah. So, one last question for you, and I'd like to ask this to a lot of the people that I talk with who are thought leaders like yourself, Joseph. Who are your influencers? But more importantly, what are some of the books that you've read that kind of have shifted you and changed you, and maybe even charged you for the work that you do? Who are the influencers?
Wow, that's really hard for me. Because I don't know if you looked at the back of Search to Belong. I don't think any good book worth its weight, if it doesn't have a bibliography that's at least as long as the book, it's not worth reading.
Yeah.
And so there are, I don't know, hundreds of books in that bibliography. All of them, let me just say, most of them were very influential. So let me say this, that probably the number one person in my life who has been one of my mentors and who is an author has been Kenan Callahan. And Kenan Callahan, in his most famous book is The Keys to a Healthy Church, 12 Keys to a Healthy Church, I think it is. But I don't believe that's his best book. He has two books on generosity and giving that are the very best. There's not a better book out there about generosity and giving and helping your congregations grow their giving. And then the second one that I think is just exceptional is called Preaching Grace. And it's not about preaching grace. It's an awful title. It's about preaching. How do I preach with grace is really what it's about. But he has, I don't know, 15 books. So, but Kenan, through my life, has been a mentor and probably influenced me more than anyone how to gracefully accept the opposite thought. To be friends with both sides of a thought. Yeah. And that probably comes through here. I hope it does, because I'm pretty comfortable with hanging on to two opposite thoughts and being very friendly with both. So I'm a hard person to argue with, because I'll support you all day long if you're
on both sides of the coin.
on both sides.